The champagne flutes caught the light like trapped stars as I navigated through the crush of silk and entitlement. The Grand Heights ballroom breathed opulence from every corner. Crystal chandeliers that must have cost more than I'd earn in 5 lifetimes, marble floors polished to mirrors, and air thick with the scent of imported lilies and something else. Cold indifference, maybe. That particular perfume the wealthy wear without knowing it, the one that smells like doors closing in your face. "Sparkling water, ma'am," I offered to a woman whose diamonds probably had their own insurance policy. She lifted a glass from my tray without breaking eye contact with her companion, as if my hand were simply an extension of the furniture. I'd learned not to take it personally. 3 years serving at events like these had taught me the first rule of survival: become invisible. Wear the uniform, keep your head down, don't exist beyond the function you serve. My server's dress, standard black polyester that trapped heat like a punishment, clung to my back in the stuffy ballroom. My feet screamed in the required heels, and we weren't even halfway through the night. The Children's Literacy Foundation Gala, they called it, though judging by the sneers I'd overheard directed at the catering staff's children who couldn't even speak proper English, literacy wasn't exactly their passion. I'd volunteered for this shift because next week's rent notice sat on my kitchen counter like a ticking bomb. The tips from charity galas sometimes bought me another month of keeping my daughter's world stable. Emma was at my sister's tonight. Again. At 5 years old, she'd already mastered the art of not asking why mommy had to work another weekend. That thought sat in my chest like a stone. "Move." A man in a Tom Ford tuxedo, I'd learned to identify designers by the contempt in their voices, shoved past me, nearly sending my tray crashing. His fault became my reflexes as I caught the glasses with the practiced grace of someone who couldn't afford to break anything. "My apologies, sir," I murmured to his back. He was already gone. That's when I saw him. The boy sat alone at a corner table, small legs swinging 6 inches above the floor, his body perfectly still despite the chaos of movement around him. While other children screamed and chased each other across the ballroom in designer outfits their parents would later complain about cleaning, this child remained in his own universe. His hands moved in deliberate patterns, arranging sugar packets into precise geometric formations. One pink, one white, one blue, over and over. Building and rebuilding, with the focused intensity of an architect designing cathedrals. His suit fit like it had been sewn directly onto his small frame, charcoal gray with subtle pinstripes, a silk tie in deep burgundy that matched the pocket square folded with mathematical precision. But beneath the expensive fabric, I could see the signs I recognized from Emma's friend at daycare. The slight rocking, the fingers that tapped rhythmic patterns against his thigh, the way he held his jaw tight against the sensory assault of violin music and clinking glasses, and too many voices all at once. What struck me wasn't the boy himself. It was the empty chairs around him, the wide berth every passing adult gave his table, the way even the other children seemed to know, with that cruel instinct kids have, that he was separate, different, untouchable. I made my rounds, refilling glasses, collecting empties, murmuring apologies for existing. Every few minutes, my gaze pulled back to the boy like a compass finding north. A couple approached his table, and for a moment I thought someone might finally acknowledge him. Instead, they simply grabbed 2 chairs and dragged them away. The boy didn't look up. His sugar packet fortress continued to grow. "Danielle, table 12 needs their entrees cleared, and you're on dessert prep in 15, Marcus, my supervisor, snapped as he speed-walked past, his clipboard clutched like a life preserver in the sea of demanding guests. I nodded, moving toward the kitchen, but something made me slow. Near the boys' table, the atmosphere shifted. It was subtle, the way water changes temperature in a lake when you swim over something deep and dark below. Conversations didn't stop exactly, but they stuttered. Spines straightened. Smiles became calculated. He entered like winter itself, had taken human form. Raymond Trent didn't walk through the ballroom so much as the ballroom rearranged itself around him. Tall enough to see over most heads, broad-shouldered in a way that made his midnight black suit look like armor rather than fashion. His face could have been handsome if it weren't so carefully empty. Sharp jawline, high cheekbones, dark hair silvering at the temples in a way that made him look eternal rather than aging. but his eyes were what stopped my breath. Dark as closed doors, scanning the room with the methodical precision of someone cataloging threats and weaknesses in equal measure. Two men shadowed him, their expensive suits unable to disguise the predatory way they moved or the telltale bulges at their sides that no tailor could fully conceal. They created a bubble of space around him that no one dared penetrate, an invisible barrier enforced by reputation alone. I'd never seen Raymond Trent in person, but I knew him the way everyone in the city knew him. His name appeared in charity programs and police reports with equal frequency. His donations built children's hospitals. His enemies disappeared into the river. He was the shadow that owned every corner of the city, the man who made politicians sweat and judges retire early. The Mafia boss they wrote think pieces about, debating whether his community investment could offset the bodies one could prove he'd ordered buried. The crowd parted. Women who'd spent thousands on their gowns suddenly looked shabby. Men who ran corporations seemed to shrink. A wave of forced smiles and nervous nods followed his path, but he acknowledged none of it. His attention was fixed straight ahead with the intensity of a missile locked on target. He was walking toward the boy. When Raymond reached the corner table, something impossible happened. The granite face didn't crack exactly, but it shifted, softened at the edges in a way so subtle I might have imagined it if I weren't watching so carefully. He placed one large hand on the boy's small shoulder, gentle, almost reverent, and leaned down to speak. The boy's hands paused their sugar packet architecture. He didn't look up, didn't make eye contact, but his head tilted slightly in acknowledgement. Raymond said something else, then straightened and gestured to one of his men, who immediately pulled out a phone and stepped away. A woman in a dress that cost more than my car approached, all gleaming teeth and confidence, her hand extended like she was offering him a gift. Raymond took her hand briefly, his expression returning to ice. She spoke, animated and bright. He responded with single syllables. Then she glanced at the boy and said something. I was too far to hear the words, but I saw her lips form them, saw the dismissive flick of her eyes toward the child's repetitive movements. The temperature in the room dropped so fast I actually shivered. Raymond Trent's face became something carved from stone at the bottom of the ocean, ancient and crushing. The woman's smile died mid-word. She stammered something else, then retreated with whatever dignity she could salvage, her heels clicking too fast against the marble. I should have moved. I had tables waiting, duties to perform, a job I was one mistake away from losing. But I couldn't stop watching. Watching the boy build his silent world of order. Watching the most dangerous man in the city orbit around him like a dark planet around a small, fragile sun. For the next hour, the pattern held. Raymond circulated through the ballroom, accepting greetings with the warmth of a January lake, conducting brief conversations that looked more like tactical operations than social pleasantries. Every 10 minutes, like clockwork, he returned to the corner table. Every time, the boy remained alone, building and rebuilding his sugar packet formations, completely absorbed in creating order from chaos. No one approached the child. No one invited him to join the games the other children played. No one even seemed to see him except his father, who watched from across the room with an expression that might have been love or might have been grief. I couldn't tell the difference. I was refilling water glasses at the adjacent table when I heard the voices. Low, meant to be private, but I'd learned to navigate spaces by sound as much as sight. Okay, pause for a second. I need to know something. Where are you right now? What are you doing while you're listening to this? Because I'm imagining some of you are folding laundry, some are pretending to work, and at least one person is listening to this in the bathroom. If that's your respect, no shame here. Leave a comment and tell me where you're tuning in from. Do me a favor, hit like and subscribe. More stories like this are coming, and you're not going to want to miss them. All right, let's get back to it. Poor thing, the woman in emerald silk whispered, her voice dripping with the kind of pity that feels more like contempt. You'd think with all that money, they could at least get him some help. Her companion, a man whose cufflinks probably cost more than my monthly rent, nodded slowly. I heard he doesn't even speak. just sits there doing those repetitive things. It's unsettling. Raymond should keep him at home. Another voice joined, this one belonging to a woman whose neck dripped with pearls. Bringing him to events like this, it's not fair to the boy. People stare. I moved closer, pretending to check if their wine glasses needed refilling, my hands steady even as something hot coiled in my chest. Well, what can you expect? Emerald Silk continued, leaning in conspiratorially. The mother abandoned them both. Couldn't handle having a broken child, I suppose. Just disappeared one day. Left Raymond with... She gestured vaguely toward Kyle's table. That. Broken. The word hung in the air like poison. I glanced at the boy. His world had contracted to the space in front of him, a universe measured in sugar packets and the precise angles between them. Pink, white, blue. He'd created an intricate mandala on the white tablecloth, each packet placed with deliberate care, each adjustment made with fingers that trembled slightly from the effort of maintaining control in a room that was too loud, too bright, too much. His lips moved soundlessly, counting or perhaps reciting something only he could hear. His left hand tapped a rhythm against his thigh. 1, 2, 3, pause, 1, 2, 3, while his right hand continued building. The tapping seemed to anchor him, a metronome keeping time in a symphony only he could hear. Autism, someone else said, the word whispered like a diagnosis and a death sentence rolled into one. High functioning, they say, but really, what kind of life is that? The poor man has everything except a normal son. I should have walked away, should have delivered drinks, cleared plates, done my job. Instead, I watched Kyle's small hands create order from chaos, watched him build his fortress of sugar and silence, while the civilized monsters around him reduced his existence to gossip over wine. Raymond stood across the ballroom, engaged in conversation with a group of businessmen who laughed too loud at whatever he'd said. But even from this distance, I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes flickered toward his son every 30 seconds like checking a vital sign. A young heir couldn't have been more than 25, drunk on his father's money and his own importance, stumbled past Kyle's table. He stopped, swaying slightly, then laughed. "Look at the little robot," he called to his friends, loud enough that nearby conversations paused. "Does it take commands? Hey, robot boy, can you compute this?" He reached out, his hand hovering over Kyle's carefully constructed fortress. The boy's entire body went rigid, his tapping accelerated. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, a desperate rhythm trying to hold back the flood. His breathing quickened, visible even from where I stood, his small chest rising and falling too fast. The drunk heir's fingers dropped lower, reaching for the center of Kyle's mandala. I set down my tray. My supervisor would be furious. The guests might complain. I might lose this job, and with it, the tips that kept Emma fed and our apartment heated. But some things cost more than money. I crossed the ballroom, breaking the invisible line between server and served, between my world and theirs, and stepped directly into the space between the drunk heir and the boy who everyone called broken. "Excuse me, sir," I said, my voice steadier than my heartbeat. "This table is reserved." The heir turned, his eyes struggling to focus on me. When they did, his lip curled. "Reserved for the retard and his babysitter." His friends laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Sir, I need to ask you to step back." I kept my body between him and Kyle, whose breathing had turned sharp and shallow behind me. The tapping against his thigh had become frantic, audible now, tap, 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 like an alarm only I could hear. "Or what?" The air swayed closer, whiskey breath hot on my face. "You'll ask your manager on me. Do you know who my father is?" "I don't care who your father is." The words left my mouth before I could stop them. "Step away from the boy." His face flushed red. "Listen, you minimum wage." "Adrian," a woman's voice cut through, sharp and cold. She materialized beside him, all blonde highlights and surgical precision, her gown the color of fresh blood. "Stop embarrassing yourself. Tormenting the help is beneath you." She said, "Help," the way other people said vermin. Adrian stumbled back, muttering, but his companion. I recognized her now, Victoria Ashford, daughter of the city's real estate empire, stepped forward instead. Her smile was perfect, practiced, and poisonous. "How sweet," she said, her voice carrying just far enough to draw attention. "The little waitress thinks she's a hero." She glanced at Kyle, who had curled into himself, his hands covering his ears, his entire body rocking slightly. "Though I'm not sure what she's protecting. Raymond Trent's damaged goods." A small crowd had begun to form, that terrible human instinct that draws people to conflict like moths to flame. "Ma'am, I really must insist." I started, but Victoria wasn't finished. No, I'm curious." She circled the table like a shark, her finger trailing along the edge. "What's so fascinating about—" Her hand swept across Kyle's sugar packet mandala. "This." The packets scattered. Pink, white, blue, all of them exploding across the table, tumbling to the floor in chaos. Kyle's fortress, his carefully constructed world of order and safety, destroyed in a single careless gesture. For a moment, everything stopped. Then Kyle's hands flew to his head, pressing hard against his temples. A sound escaped him, not quite a scream, more like a wounded animal's keen. High and thin and utterly broken. His entire body began to rock violently, his eyes squeezed shut, his mouth forming words that wouldn't come. "Oh God," someone whispered. "Is he having a seizure?" "Someone call security," another voice added. Victoria stepped back, her perfect smile faltering. He's fine, he's just—" "Get away from him." My voice didn't sound like my own anymore. It came from somewhere deeper, somewhere primal. I dropped to my knees beside Kyle's chair, ignoring the stares, ignoring Victoria's protests, ignoring everything except the small boy whose world had just shattered. "Kyle," I said softly, not touching him. I knew better than that, but close enough that my voice might reach through the sensory storm. "Kyle, I'm here, you're safe." His rocking continued, faster now, his hands pressed so hard against his head I worried he'd hurt himself. The sound he made rose in pitch. Around us, the ballroom had gone quiet except for whispers. I could feel them watching, judging, probably already composing the story they'd tell at their next cocktail party about the dramatic scene at the charity gala. Then I felt it. The change in air pressure that meant someone large was standing very close behind me. The temperature drop that meant the most dangerous man in the room had just found his son in distress. And me, a nobody waitress, kneeling at the center of the wreckage. I didn't turn around. I kept my eyes on Kyle, on his small face twisted in agony, and I knew that whatever happened next, whatever price I'd pay for crossing these invisible lines, I'd already made my choice. "What?" Raymond Trent's voice came from behind me, each word carved from ice. "Happened to my son." I didn't answer Raymond Trent, didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge the weight of his presence or the fear rippling through the crowd like an electric current. All of that existed in a world I'd already left behind the moment I knelt beside this child. "Kyle," I said again, keeping my voice low and steady. "I'm going to help you, okay? But I need you to listen to my hands." His rocking continued, violent and desperate. The sound coming from his throat had become a continuous keen, and his fingers were digging into his scalp hard enough to leave marks. Around us, someone whimpered. I heard Marcus hiss my name from somewhere in the crowd, probably calculating how quickly he could fire me and distance the catering company from this scene. I lifted my hand slowly, deliberately, and held it 6 inches from Kyle's line of sight. Then I began to tap my fingers against my palm. 1, 2, 3. Pause. 1, 2, 3. Pause. The same rhythm I'd seen him use earlier, the metronome that anchored him. "See," I whispered. 1, 2, 3, just like you were doing. 1, 2, 3. His rocking slowed, just slightly. His eyes, squeezed shut moments ago, cracked open, fixing on my hand with the desperate focus of a drowning person spotting shore. 1, 2, 3. Pause. 1, 2, 3. I'd learned this from Emma's friend, Marcus. Different Marcus. A 5-year-old boy who taught my daughter that sometimes words weren't the only language that mattered. His mother had shown me how rhythm could cut through chaos, how pattern could rebuild safety when the world became too much. Kyle's breathing began to match the rhythm. In for 3 counts, Hold. Out for 3 counts. His hands slowly lowered from his head, still trembling but no longer inflicting harm. That's it, I murmured. You're doing so well. 1, 2, 3. Behind me, I felt Raymond move closer. The crowd's whispers died completely. Even Victoria had gone silent, though I could sense her calculating how to spin this, how to avoid whatever was coming. Kyle's eyes stayed locked on my hand, following the rhythm like a lifeline. His own hands came down to his lap, and after a moment he began to mirror the pattern. Tap, tap, tap against his thigh. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. His rocking slowed to a gentle sway, then stopped. The keen faded to rapid breathing, then to something almost normal. Good, I said softly. You're safe. Nobody's going to touch your things again. I glanced at the scattered sugar packets on the floor, then back at Kyle. Slowly, carefully, I reached for the nearest packet, pink, and held it up. May I? His eyes tracked the packet, a tiny nod. I placed it on the table in front of him, then another, white, then blue, not in his pattern, I didn't know his pattern, but offering him the pieces, returning what had been taken. He watched each one, his breathing steadying further, and then his small hands reached out. He began to rebuild, his movements still shaky but purposeful. The tension in his small body began to drain. Not completely. He was still wound tight as a spring, but enough that the crisis had passed. Enough that he was returning from wherever that sensory storm had taken him. Only then did I risk looking up. Raymond Trent stood directly behind me, and the expression on his face was something I couldn't name. Not anger, though I'd expected that. Not gratitude either. Something more complex, more dangerous. His dark eyes moved from his son's hands, now carefully arranging packets again, to my face, and the weight of that gaze felt like standing before a judge who hadn't yet decided on sentence or acquittal. Who are you? His voice was quiet, controlled, but it carried in the silent ballroom like a gunshot. Nobody, I said because it was true. I'm nobody. His jaw tightened. Nobody doesn't know that technique. Nobody doesn't recognize a sensory meltdown and respond with exactly the right intervention. His eyes narrowed. Who are you? Danielle Banks, I said, my voice steadier than my pulse. I work for. You're fired, Marcus called from somewhere in the crowd, his voice pitched high with panic. She's fired, Mr. Trent. She won't bother you or your son again. Raymond's hand came up, a single gesture, and Marcus's voice died mid-sentence. You, Raymond said to me, don't move. Then Raymond turned, and the temperature in the ballroom somehow dropped further. His gaze swept across the crowd, landing on Victoria Ashford with the precision of a sniper's scope. You, the single word carried enough menace that Victoria actually flinched. You destroyed my son's arrangement. It was an accident, Mr. Trent, I swear. Her voice, so confident moments ago, had become thin and desperate. An accident, Raymond repeated the word like he was tasting something rotten. You accidentally swept your hand across his table, accidentally traumatized a child, accidentally caused a sensory meltdown that could have resulted in self-harm. He took one step toward her, just one. She stumbled backward like he'd shoved her. Do you know what I do to people who hurt my son? The silence was absolute. Even the string quartet had stopped playing. Mr. Trent, please, I didn't know. You didn't know? His smile was a razor blade. That's your defense, ignorance. He glanced at one of his men, who materialized beside Victoria with the speed of a shadow at sunset. Escort Miss Ashford out. Inform her father that the Ashford development contract is terminated, effective immediately. No, please. That's millions of dollars, my father will. Your father will learn that there are consequences for raising children who lack basic human decency. Raymond's attention had already moved past her, dismissing her existence as completely as she dismissed his son. Victoria's protests faded as she was efficiently removed from the ballroom. The crowd remained frozen, no one daring to move or speak. Adrian and his friends had vanished entirely. Raymond turned back to me. I was still kneeling beside Kyle's chair, my server's dress wrinkled and damp with spilled champagne from somewhere in the chaos. Kyle's hands continued their work, rebuilding his fortress with intense focus, as if the entire confrontation hadn't happened. "Stand up," Raymond said. I stood, my knees protesting. Up close, he was even more imposing than I'd realized. Tall enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes, and built like someone who didn't rely on bodyguards for his own protection. "How did you know?" His voice was quieter now, meant only for me. "That technique, the rhythmic tapping, how did you know it would work?" "I have a daughter," I said, my mouth dry. "She has a friend who needs similar support sometimes. His mother taught me." Something flickered across Raymond's face. "You have a child." It wasn't a question, but I nodded anyway. "Emma, she's 5. And her father." "Gone." The word came out harder than I intended. "It's just us." Raymond's expression gave nothing away, but I felt the weight of calculation behind his eyes. He was assembling information, building a profile, determining my value or threat, or whatever metric men like him used to categorize the world. "What's your name again?" Danielle Banks." He pulled something from his inner jacket pocket, a card, black with silver embossing. He held it out to me. When I didn't immediately take it, he reached for my hand and pressed the card into my palm. His fingers were warm despite the coldness of everything else about him, and the contact lasted a fraction longer than necessary. "Tomorrow," he said, 3 o'clock, that address." I looked down at the card. An address in the Heights, the part of the city where people like me only went to clean houses or cater parties. No name, no phone number. Just the address and a number, 300. "I work tomorrow," I said, the words automatic even as I realized how absurd they sounded. "I have a shift at—" "Not anymore." His eyes held mine, and there was something in them that made my breath catch. Not a threat exactly, but a statement of absolute certainty. 3 o'clock, Danielle Banks, don't be late." He turned to Kyle, his entire demeanor shifting as he placed a gentle hand on his son's shoulder. "Time to go home, Kyle." Kyle nodded without looking up, but he carefully gathered his reconstructed sugar packets and slipped them into his pocket before standing. Raymond began to walk away, Kyle's small hand now tucked into his larger one. Then he paused, glancing back over his shoulder at me. "Wear something comfortable," he said. "You'll be staying for a while." It wasn't a request. It wasn't even an order. It was simply a fact being stated, a future already decided. Then they were gone, the crowd parting silently before them, and I stood there holding a black card that felt like a contract I'd signed without reading the terms. Marcus appeared at my elbow, his face pale. "Danielle, what the hell just happened?" I looked at the card, then at the space where Raymond and Kyle had disappeared. "I have absolutely no idea," I whispered. But that was a lie. I knew exactly what had happened. Raymond Trent now owned my time. The only question was what he planned to do with it. My shift ended at midnight, though Marcus had made it clear I shouldn't bother coming back. "You're done," he'd said, not meeting my eyes. "Mr. Trent made it clear you're no longer in our employ. Your final check will be mailed." I'd nodded, too exhausted to argue, too numb to process what had happened. The other servers had given me a wide berth for the rest of the evening, like whatever curse I'd brought down on myself might be contagious. The night air hit me like a slap when I pushed through the service exit into the alley behind the Grand Heights. January cold, the kind that seeped through my thin coat and settled in my bones. I pulled out my phone to call a rideshare, my fingers clumsy on the screen, and that's when I saw it. The black SUV idled at the mouth of the alley, its engine purring like a satisfied predator. Tinted windows reflected the streetlights, revealing nothing of what waited inside. It was the kind of vehicle that cost more than I'd earn in 5 years, the kind that didn't belong in this part of the city after dark unless someone was collecting a debt. I could walk the other way. There was a back exit through the kitchen, a route that would take me to the bus stop 3 blocks over. I could go home, kiss Emma goodnight at my sister's place, pretend tonight had been just another shift serving people who didn't see me. But the black card in my pocket felt like it was burning through the fabric of my dress. As if sensing my thoughts, the SUV's back door opened. No one emerged, just the door standing open like a mouth, waiting to swallow me whole. "Miss Banks," the voice came from inside, male, professional, empty of inflection. "Mr. Trent is expecting you." "Tomorrow," I called back, my voice steadier than my heartbeat. "He said 3 o'clock tomorrow." Plans changed. A man stepped out, one of Raymond's shadows from the gala, the one who'd escorted Victoria Ashford to her public humiliation. Up close, he looked like he'd been carved from the same stone as his employer. "Mr. Trent doesn't like to wait." "I need to go home. My daughter is safely at your sister's apartment on Maple Street." He said it without malice, just stating a fact, but the implication froze my blood. They knew where Emma was. They'd already mapped out my life, identified my pressure points, located every person who mattered to me. "How did you?" "The car, Miss Banks." He gestured to the open door. "Mr. Trent values punctuality." This was it. The moment where I could still walk away, call the police, disappear into the night and hope that Raymond Trent would lose interest in a nobody waitress who'd shown his son basic human kindness. But even as I thought it, I knew it was a fantasy. Men like Raymond Trent didn't lose interest. They didn't forget. And they certainly didn't let go once they'd decided you belonged to them. I thought of Kyle's small hands rebuilding his fortress, of the desperate keen he'd made when his world shattered, of the way Raymond had looked at me with something that might have been hope or hunger or both. I walked toward the SUV. The interior smelled of leather and something darker, gun oil, maybe, or just the scent of power concentrated into a small space. The man who'd spoken climbed into the passenger seat. The driver, another blank-faced sentinel, pulled away from the curb without a word. "Where are we going?" I asked, even though I already knew. "The estate." The first man didn't turn around. "Mr. Trent is waiting." We drove through the city, leaving behind the familiar streets of my neighborhood for the ascending roads that led to the heights. The buildings grew larger, the spaces between them wider, the walls higher. This was a different world, one where people like me only existed to serve, to clean, to remain invisible. The SUV turned through gates that opened before we reached them, as if the estate itself was watching our approach. A long driveway wound through manicured grounds lit by subtle landscape lighting. Trees that probably cost more than my car lined the path like sentries. Then the house emerged from the darkness. Not a house, an estate. Stone and glass and old money transformed into architecture, sprawling across the hilltop like a crown. Lights glowed in several windows, warm and inviting in a way that felt like a lie. The SUV stopped at the main entrance. The door opened, and I realized with a start that we hadn't been alone in the car. Another man emerged from the third row, where he'd been sitting in absolute silence, watching me the entire drive. "Welcome to the Trent estate, Miss Banks," he said, his voice carrying the faint trace of an accent I couldn't place. "Mr. Trent is in the conservatory. He asked that you not keep him waiting." I stepped out of the car, my server's dress wrinkled and inappropriate, my feet aching in heels I'd been wearing for 14 hours. The front door stood open, light spilling out onto the stone steps. Somewhere inside that house was Raymond Trent, the man who just bought my time without asking the price. And somewhere, I hoped, was the small boy who needed me when no one else would step forward. I climbed the steps, crossed the threshold, and let the door close behind me with a sound like a cell locking. The gates opened before the SUV even stopped, as if the estate itself recognized Raymond Trent's approach. Wrought iron gave way to a driveway lined with manicured hedges that probably cost more to maintain than I earned in a year. The house, no, mansion, rose before us like something from another century, all stone columns and arched windows that gleamed in the afternoon sun. I'd left Emma at my sister's with a story about a job interview. That part wasn't entirely a lie. I just didn't mention that saying no wasn't an option. The driver opened my door without a word. I stepped out onto cobblestones that had probably been imported from Italy or some other place where even the rocks had pedigree. Two men in dark suits flanked the entrance, their eyes tracking my movement with the focused attention of trained predators. Neither wore their weapons openly, but the bulges under their jackets told the story clearly enough. The front door opened before I could knock. A woman in her 50s, sharp-eyed and impeccably dressed, gave me a single assessing look. "Miss Banks, Mr. Trent is expecting you. Follow me." Inside, the house was somehow both opulent and cold. Marble floors that echoed with every step. Artwork on the walls that I recognized from my one art history class. Original oils worth more than my entire apartment building. A chandelier that dripped crystal like frozen rain. But there was something else, too. Security cameras tucked discreetly in corners. Reinforced doors. Windows that looked too thick to be ordinary glass. This wasn't just a home. It was a fortress. We passed a room where 3 men sat around a table covered in papers and laptops. They stopped talking as we walked by, their eyes following me with the kind of attention that made my skin prickle. One had scars running down the side of his face. Another wore his shoulder holster openly, no pretense of civility. "The staff quarters are in the west wing," the woman said as we climbed a curved staircase. "Your room has been prepared. Mr. Trent will brief you on Kyle's routines and requirements." "I'm sorry," I said, finding my voice. "My room." She glanced back, one eyebrow raised. "You didn't think this was a day visit, did you?" Before I could respond, we reached the 2nd floor and I heard it. A sound like wind chimes, rhythmic and precise. The woman opened a door and there was Kyle. He sat on the floor of what must have been a playroom, surrounded by geometric puzzles and building blocks arranged in intricate patterns. The sound came from him, a humming that matched the pattern of his hands as they worked. He wore soft clothes now, nothing like the formal suit from the gala, and his feet were bare against thick carpet. The room itself was a study in sensory consideration. Soft lighting, no harsh fluorescence, walls painted in muted blues and greens. One corner held weighted blankets and what looked like noise-canceling headphones. Another had shelves organized by color and size with obsessive precision. "Kyle," the woman said gently, "you have a visitor." He didn't look up, but his humming changed pitch slightly. Recognition, maybe, or acknowledgement. I stepped into the room slowly, carefully, and lowered myself to the floor several feet away from him. Close enough to be present, far enough not to intrude. "Hi, Kyle," I said softly. "Remember me from last night?" His hands paused briefly, then continued their work, but his head tilted, just slightly, in my direction. "I like what you're building," I continued, watching the pattern emerge. "Is it a tower?" This time his hands stopped completely. He turned his head, not quite looking at me, but oriented toward my voice. Then slowly, deliberately, he tapped his fingers against the carpet. 1, 2, 3. Pause. 1, 2, 3. Our rhythm, the one I'd used to bring him back from the edge. Something warm and painful bloomed in my chest. I lifted my hand and tapped it back. 1, 2, 3. Pause. The smallest smile ghosted across Kyle's face. Not directed at me, his eyes still focused on some middle distance, but there nonetheless. Real and brief and beautiful. "He doesn't do that." Raymond's voice came from the doorway, rough with something I couldn't name. "He doesn't acknowledge people like that, ever." I looked up. Raymond stood framed in the doorway, still in his suit but with the jacket removed and his shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows. For the first time, I could see the scars. One running along his forearm, another disappearing under his collar. A man who'd survived things that left permanent marks. But his eyes were only on his son, watching that small smile with an expression of such naked longing it hurt to witness. "Miss Banks," he said, his voice carefully controlled again. "We need to talk about why you're really here." Kyle resumed his building, humming softly, and I realized that somewhere between the gala and this moment, I'd crossed a threshold I could never uncross. I was inside the lion's den. And I'd come willingly. Raymond's study was all dark wood and leather, the kind of room where empires were built and enemies were unmade. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined one wall, though I doubted he had much time for reading. The desk between us was massive, a barrier that felt both physical and symbolic. Behind him, Windows overlooked the grounds where more guards patrolled with the regularity of clockwork. He poured 2 glasses of scotch from a crystal decanter, slid one across the desk toward me. I didn't touch it. "You're afraid of me," he said, not a question. "Yes." "Good." He took a sip, his eyes never leaving mine. "Fear means you understand the situation, but you came anyway. That means you're either stupid or brave, and I don't think you're stupid. I came because you didn't give me a choice." "There's always a choice, Danielle." He set down his glass with deliberate precision. "You could have run, changed your name, left the city. I would have found you eventually, but you could have tried." He leaned back in his chair. "Instead, you walked through my door. Why?" I thought of Kyle's small smile, the way his fingers had tapped our rhythm. Because he responded to me. Because he needed someone and no one else was paying attention. Something dangerous flickered in Raymond's eyes. Everyone pays attention to Kyle. They stare, they whisper, they pity. What they don't do is see him. "You see him," I said quietly. "I'm his father, I'm supposed to see him." His hand tightened around the glass. "But I don't understand him. I've hired the best therapists, the most expensive specialists. I've read every book, attended every seminar. I can negotiate with politicians and execute men without hesitation, but I can't understand why my son won't look at me, won't speak to me, won't—" His voice cracked just slightly and he stopped. The silence stretched between us, heavy with things unsaid. "His mother left when he was 3, Raymond continued, his voice carefully controlled again. "She said she couldn't handle it, couldn't handle him, couldn't handle having a son who would never be normal." The word came out like poison. "She told me I should institutionalize him, make him someone else's problem." "But you didn't." "He's my son." The words were simple, absolute. "He's my son, and I would burn this city to ash before I let anyone make him feel like he's a problem to be solved." He stood, moving to the window, his back to me. "But I'm failing him anyway. Every time he melts down, every time someone calls him broken, every time he sits alone in a room full of people, I'm failing him." I watched the rigid line of his shoulders, the way his hands curled into fists at his sides. This was the man the city feared, the monster whose name made grown men nervous. And he was coming apart because he couldn't help his own child. "You connected with him in minutes," Raymond said, still not turning around. "You did something I've spent 8 years trying to figure out. You gave him a rhythm he could follow back from chaos." He finally looked at me, and his expression was raw. "I need you to teach me how to do that." "Mr. Trent." "Raymond." He moved back to the desk, bracing his hands against it. "And I'm not asking, Danielle. I'm offering you a position. You'll live here, full room and board. Salary of $200,000 a year plus benefits. Your daughter will attend the best private school in the city, fully paid. You'll have access to anything you need." The numbers made my head spin. That was more than I'd make in 5 years of waitressing. "You want me to be Kyle's, what, nanny, therapist?" "I want you to be whatever he needs you to be." Raymond's eyes held mine with an intensity that made it hard to breathe. "I want you to be the person who understands his language when I can't, who can calm him when I fail, who can give him what I can't seem to provide no matter how hard I try. And if I say no?" His smile was tired, resigned. "Then you walk out that door and I never contact you again. You go back to your life, your apartment, your daughter. I won't touch you or threaten you or any of the things you're probably imagining right now." He paused. "But you'll know that somewhere in this city, a little boy who responded to you, who recognized you, who trusted you enough to smile, that boy will go back to being alone." It was manipulation, elegant and effective, but it was also true. "I'm not qualified," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not a therapist or a special education teacher or—" "Kyle doesn't need more qualifications. He needs someone who sees him as a person, not a diagnosis." Raymond straightened, and suddenly he was every inch the Mafia boss again. "You have 24 hours to decide. After that, the offer expires." "Why me?" I asked. "Why not hire a dozen professionals who actually know what they're doing?" "Because in a ballroom full of people, you were the only one who dropped to your knees for a child who wasn't yours. The only one who risked your job, your safety, your comfort for him." His voice softened, just barely. That's not something I can hire, Danielle. That's something you either have or you don't. He walked around the desk, stopping close enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes. 24 hours, he repeated. Choose carefully. Then he opened the door, and the same woman from before appeared to escort me out. As I walked through that fortress of a house, past guards and guns, and all the trappings of a world I didn't belong to, I already knew what my answer would be. I'd known the moment Kyle smiled. I called Raymond at midnight. He answered on the first ring, as if he'd been waiting. Yes, I said. No preamble, no negotiation. Just the single word that would change everything. Good. A pause, then. Pack what matters. Everything else will be provided. A car will arrive at your apartment at 8 tomorrow morning. I need to explain this to my daughter. To my sister. I can't just... You can and you will. The less they know, the safer they are. His voice softened just slightly. Trust me on this, Danielle. In my world, ignorance is protection. The line went dead. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat on Emma's bed at my sister's place, watching her small chest rise and fall, trying to memorize the exact shade of her hair in the moonlight, trying to figure out how to explain to a 5-year-old that our lives were about to transform in ways I couldn't fully articulate. The car arrived precisely at 8. Not the black SUV from before, but something worse, a moving truck followed by 2 sedans. Men in suits began efficiently packing my apartment with the kind of speed that spoke of practice. They handled my mismatched dishes and second-hand furniture with the same professional care they probably used when disposing of bodies. I tried not to think about that. Miss Banks, a new face, younger than the others, handed me a tablet. Mr. Trent needs you to review these documents. School enrollment forms for Emma, background check authorizations, non-disclosure agreements that ran 40 pages, medical release forms, and at the bottom, an employment contract with numbers that still didn't feel real. There's also this. He handed me a phone, sleek and new. Your new number. Your old phone will be deactivated for security purposes. Anyone who needs to reach you has already been informed. Informed? I haven't told anyone yet. Mr. Trent took care of it. He said it like it was normal, like having a Mafia boss rearrange your life overnight was just efficient management. Your sister received a call this morning explaining you'd been offered a live-in position with a private family. Your landlord received 3 months' rent as notice. Your previous employer was compensated for the sudden resignation. My hands felt numb. He's erasing me. He's protecting you. The young man's expression remained neutral. In Mr. Trent's world, Miss Banks, you can't be connected to your old life without becoming a liability. To him, to Kyle, and most importantly, to your daughter. The words landed like ice water. Emma, anyone who wanted to hurt Raymond, and there were many, now had 2 new targets. Kyle and whoever Kyle had attached himself to. There will be security, the man continued. You won't see them, but they'll be there. Your daughter's school, your sister's home, anywhere you go, it's non-negotiable. I thought of Emma walking to school with invisible shadows following. Of my sister being watched without knowing why. Of my life becoming a carefully constructed facade designed to protect us from threats I couldn't see. Welcome to the family, Miss Banks, he said, and there was something almost sympathetic in his voice. By noon, my apartment was empty. By 2, Emma and I were driving through those wrought iron gates, her small hand tight in mine, her eyes wide as she took in the mansion that would become our home. Mommy, are we rich now? She whispered. No, baby, I said, pulling her close. We're something else entirely. Raymond was waiting in the foyer, Kyle beside him. When Emma saw another child, she brightened instinctively, starting to move forward before I caught her hand. Emma, this is Kyle, I said carefully. He doesn't like to be touched or surprised. We have to be very gentle with him, okay? She nodded solemnly, then did something that made my heart crack open. She sat down on the marble floor, cross-legged, and waited. Just waited, giving Kyle space to approach on his terms. Kyle watched her for a long moment, his head tilted in that characteristic way. Then, slowly, he sat down too, Not close, several feet away, but facing her. He tapped his fingers against the floor. 1, 2, 3. Emma looked at me, confused. I tapped the rhythm on my own leg, showing her. Her face lit with understanding. She tapped it back, clumsy but earnest. Kyle's expression didn't change, but he tapped again. Faster this time. Emma matched it. Raymond's hand found my shoulder, his grip firm enough that I felt the tremor in his fingers. When I looked up, his face was carefully blank, but his eyes told a different story. His son was communicating, playing, connecting with another child for the first time in how long? Years. You made the right choice, Raymond said quietly, meant only for me. I watched our children, because that's what they'd become in this moment, ours. Tap rhythms back and forth, building a language between them. Did I asked, or did you just make it impossible to choose anything else? His hand tightened slightly on my shoulder, not threatening, almost protective. In my world, Danielle, those are the same thing. I looked around the marble foyer, at the guards stationed discreetly in corners, at the security cameras and reinforced doors, at the golden cage that would keep us safe and trapped in equal measure. I wasn't a waitress anymore. I was a ward of the Mafia. And my daughter was tapping code with the boss's son, like it was the most natural thing in the world. God help us both. 3 weeks had passed since I'd walked through those gates. 3 weeks since I'd stopped being Danielle Banks, struggling waitress, and became someone else entirely. Someone who lived in a mansion with armed guards. Someone whose daughter attended a private school with a security detail she didn't know existed. Someone who sat across from a Mafia boss at breakfast and discussed a child's therapy schedule like it was normal. The garden had become our sanctuary, Kyle's safe space away from the marble and crystal inside. Raymond had it designed specifically for him, sensory paths with different textures, a corner with wind chimes that sang in mathematical patterns, raised beds where Kyle could dig in the soil and create order from earth. Emma was there now, helping Kyle arrange stones by size and color. She'd learned his language faster than I had, the way children do, adapting without judgment or fear. She knew not to touch him without warning, knew that when he hummed he was self-soothing, knew that his silence wasn't rejection but simply his way of being. She's good with him, Raymond said beside me. We stood on the terrace watching them, our shoulders almost touching. Over the past weeks, the distance between us had slowly contracted. Not romantic, not exactly, but something more complicated. Partnership born from mutual devotion to a child who needed us both. She doesn't see him as different, I said, just as Kyle. Like you, his voice carried something I couldn't quite name. You never looked at him the way others do. I glanced at him. He'd shed his suit jacket, his shirt sleeves rolled up, and in the afternoon sun he looked almost human. Almost like a father watching his son play, rather than a kingpin whose name made politicians sweat. I looked at him the way I'd want someone to look at Emma if she needed help, and I wasn't there. Raymond's jaw tightened. His mother looked at him like he was a burden she'd been cursed with. Every specialist looked at him like a puzzle to solve. Every therapist looked at him like a case study. He turned to me fully. You looked at him like he was a child who needed kindness. Do you know how rare that is? In the garden, Kyle laughed, actually laughed, as Emma made exaggerated faces at a butterfly. The sound was rusty, unpracticed, but real. Raymond's entire body went still, like he was afraid any movement might shatter the moment. He's laughing, he whispered, and there was something broken in his voice. I haven't heard him laugh in 2 years. I reached for his hand without thinking. His fingers closed around mine, tight enough to hurt, and I realized he was shaking. You did this, he said. You and Emma, you gave him something I couldn't. We gave him what you've been giving him all along. I squeezed his hand. A safe place to exist. We just added someone who speaks his language. Danielle, he turned to face me fully, and the expression on his face was raw. I know what this cost you. Your freedom, your old life, your choice. I chose to stay. After I made it impossible to choose anything else. His thumb brushed across my knuckles. I brought you into a world where people kill for less than looking at someone wrong, where your daughter now has a security detail because she plays with my son, where you can't go to a grocery store without armed men following at a distance." His voice dropped. "I turned you into a prisoner and called it protection." I could have agreed, could have thrown his guilt back at him, weaponized his rare moment of vulnerability. But in the garden, Emma was teaching Kyle how to make a flower crown, and he was trying, actually trying, even though the texture of the stems made him flinch. "You gave me a place where my daughter goes to a school that costs more than I made in a decade," I said quietly. "Where she's safe, where I don't lie awake at night wondering if I can make rent, where I have a purpose beyond just surviving." I met his eyes. "And yes, it came with walls and guards and the constant knowledge that your world is dangerous. But my old world was dangerous too, just in different ways." "Danielle, I'm not saying it's perfect, Raymond. I'm not saying I don't sometimes miss the freedom to walk down a street without being watched, but I'm also not saying I regret it." I gestured toward the children. "Look at him, really look at him." Kyle was wearing the flower crown Emma had made, wilted daisies sitting crooked on his dark hair. He looked ridiculous. He looked happy. "I traded invisibility for this," I continued. "For being seen, for mattering to someone, for giving my daughter a life I could never have provided." I turned back to Raymond. "You call it a crown of thorns, maybe it is, but it's still a crown." Raymond pulled me closer, his forehead nearly touching mine, his hand still gripping mine like a lifeline. "I don't deserve you, either of you." "Probably not." I allowed myself a small smile. "But Kyle does, and that's what matters." In the garden, Emma shrieked with laughter as Kyle finally smiled, really smiled, and attempted to put a flower crown on her head in return. The guards stationed around the perimeter kept their distance, invisible protectors of this small moment of joy. This was my life now. A kingdom built on blood and silk, ruled by a man who could destroy cities but trembled when his son laughed. A family forged not from love but from necessity, and somehow becoming something real despite its foundation. I stood between Raymond and Kyle, between the monster and the miracle, and realized I'd become the bridge between their two worlds. My invisibility was gone. In its place was something far more dangerous. Purpose,